Welcome everyone to the Lofi Poli Sci podcast. I'm your host Michael Pickering, and that's right, Lo-Fi as in low fidelity, low quality, in your face, messy as can be global news show. Here we're going to talk about that famous question, what's going on in the world today? We'll be covering 5 headlines from across the globe and then choose one to go into a more detailed analysis. The news, fresh off the press. Source, BBC World News, Europe. Poland must suspend Judge Discipline Panel, ECJ. The European Court of Justice has ruled that Poland has 1 month to dismantle its disciplinary board for judges, on the grounds that the Conservative Law and Justice Party in control of the government chooses who actually sits on the panel, adding to a large amount of partisan bias as well as taking away judicial independence from the courts. If the Polish government does not act within a month, they could face fines from the European Union. The implications. Democracy is a fragile balance of power and checks between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. Taking away judicial independence effectively consolidates power in the other government institutions and eliminates important checks on government corruption and anti-democratic practices. While democracy is a choice for every country, and what they do with it is up to them, being a member of the European Union is also a choice. The institution is predicated on the beliefs that integration and democratization are the ways of the future, and the best form of government. If you want to stay part of the EU, you must embrace democracy, with its faults and its benefits. Next up, source, Reuters World News. Syrian Air Force behind chemical attacks, investigation team finds. A team of experts in determining if chemical weapons were used across the globe determined that in 2017 the Assad regime used sarin nerve gas and chlorine in bombing attacks during the ongoing civil war. The Syrian and Russian governments have denied these allegations in the past. The implications. As we reported yesterday on the targeting of civilian locations in the country, this report too shall go to the UN Security Council, and what takes place afterward is up to them. Here at Lofi Poli Sci, we'll be watching these developments closely to see how this international body handles these claims of war crimes. And guess what, folks? It's Weekly Wednesdays with Transparency International, and our country of focus this week, our friendly neighbor to the north, Canada. That's right, let's take some time to get to know our neighboring democracy before we start looking around the world to other countries we know little about. Remember from last week's description, Transparency International Summary, the Corruption Perception Index ranks 180 countries and territories by their perceived levels of public sector corruption, according to experts and business people. This year's analysis shows corruption is more pervasive in countries where big money can freely influence electoral processes and where governments listen only to the voices of wealthy or well-connected individuals. Today we see how Canada holds up to these organizations' scrutiny. Out of 180 countries and territories in the world, Canada comes in at number 12, tied with the United Kingdom, Australia, and Austria. Canada's in between Iceland at number 11 and Hong Kong at number 16. This means that there are only 11 other countries in the world, according to Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index 2019, that have less corrupt governments than Canada. When looking at the country's score, however, we see that out of 0, being completely corrupt, to 100, being very clean, Canada comes in at a 77 out of 100. The implications. That although Canada is one of the freest countries in the world, and is tied for number 12 as the least corrupt country in the world, we see that there is still work to be done. This indicates that no country, no government, anywhere in the world is completely without corruption. Remember, Lo-Fi Poli Sci listeners, democratization, the process of becoming a democratic country, is always and everywhere an unfinished process. Write in with a country of your choice for next week, and we'll begin going into more details about corruption in the country and across the globe. And now for our headline in the Spotlight segment. Source, 538 Politics. Why Bernie Sanders lost. Yesterday we brought you the 538 story on did Sanders blow it for the Democratic left, or was the nomination always out of reach? It's only fitting that we return to 538 that reported today that Bernie Sanders has officially dropped out of the race for the Democratic Party's nomination to run for the President of the United States. The background and implications of this story. Instead of going into the why Sanders dropped out, which the article does go into more depth just as yesterday's report did, we're going to focus on the presidential race moving forward, now that Sanders has dropped out. Even though the Democratic nomination doesn't actually take place until November, Sanders was the last major opponent of Joe Biden, essentially handing the nomination to Biden. This means that now the Biden campaign can focus on the general election in November against President Trump. This provides quite a bit more time for his campaign to come up with an election strategy. However, as we all know, these times are a-changin', and the Biden campaign will have to balance a unique strategy of the old reliable tactics with new and untested, but potentially more effective tactics to win the election. The question to students of Lo-Fi Poli Sci: which direction will the Biden campaign lean? The new untested because of the times, or the traditional campaign techniques of the past? Write in and let us know your thoughts. And a last piece of news from the BBC section, Science. Bepi Colombo in the driving seat to Mercury. The Bepi Colombo space probe, created by a collaborative effort between Europe and Japan, will use the Earth's gravitational pull on Friday to slingshot itself towards a 5-year journey to reach Mercury, where it will orbit the planet and collect new data so that we may better understand the planet closest to the Sun. The implications. Use the Earth's gravitational pull to slingshot itself on a 5-year journey to Mercury? Wow, Lofi Poli Sci listeners, that's some high-stakes math right there. We like numbers in political science. We use quantitative data quite often with complex econometric analysis, but this is some next-level geometry. Disclaimer and apology, we here at Lofi know that saying next-level geometry is babyfying the paramount and complex mathematical equations that go into a venture of this magnitude, which costs billions of dollars. That being said, I'll simply say, thank you to our friendly mathematicians and scientists that strive ever further into the cosmos, so that we may better understand who we are. And that's a brief snapshot of what's going on in the world today. Please write in with your questions, comments, or requests of countries for our news segments to lofipolisci@planetmail.com. That's Lofi, L-O-F-I, Poly, P-O-L-I, Sci, S-C-I, lofipolisci@planetmail.com. Let me say thank you so much for listening. Stay safe, wash those hands, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Lofi Poli Sci podcast. Pickering, signing off.